Marvel and DC are the two titans of the comic industry. They've been in the business since the 1930s, and their impressive roster of titles and heroes has naturally led to endless arguments about which is better. One of the biggest linchpins in the argument is which company is more original. In other words, which has ripped off the most from the other. It's a classic battle like, Coke versus Pepsi, and much like the Cola Wars, this comics rivalry has seen both sides dip into each other's ideas. Now, the argument has raged on for decades, and there are lots of examples where Marvel has ripped off DC, and in return, DC has ripped off Marvel. Now, while this list isn't here to settle the score, it's going to give you a peek into the convoluted and convenient history of the company's inspirations. Sometimes it looks like the companies have copied straight from each other, while other times they're both copying from somewhere else. The companies have also shared more than just ideas and sources. They've shared creators, and in more than a few cases, these writers and artists managed to produce some rather similar characters. Before we start, make sure you follow us by clicking on that like button below the video to get more sweet content from Animated Times. And I'm Andrew Caravella. You can find me on social, handle On Air Andrew. Alright guys, let's go. Coming in at number 10, it's Aquaman, which is clearly a ripoff of Namor the Submariner. Now, while flying heroes are a dime a dozen, there are only two classic heroes whose domain is the entire ocean. Namor the Submariner debuted in 1939 in Marvel Comics #1, and he started as an anti-hero, an agent of chaos. He has gills, an incredible swimming ability, super strength, speed, and stamina. He can also control water and telepathically connect to all marine life. Early in his run, he threatened to sink Manhattan under a tidal wave. There are also the powers of the Atlantean king of DC Comics, Aquaman. You see, Aquaman is also an outsider with a troubled relationship with the surface world, superhuman speed and strength, especially underwater, and the ability to command ocean life. While he only made his first appearance in 1941, he did beat Namor to the post of being labeled an Atlantean. Namor's home and origins were only identified in 1949. Number 9, Doomsday. That's a ripoff of Hulk. Now, you see, before going too far into this example, it should be noted that Hulk himself was originally a ripoff of the DC character Solomon Grundy. That being said, 30 years after Marvel created Hulk, DC ripped off their own ripped-off character with the creation of the supervillain Doomsday. You see, Doomsday was a lab experiment gone wrong in an attempt to create a more perfect, invulnerable human, much like Hulk's origin. Also, like Hulk, Doomsday grows stronger the more he fights. Now, the only difference here is that Doomsday grows stronger by adapting and evolving, whereas Hulk grows stronger from increased anger. Even the color of Doomsday is reminiscent of Hulk, since Hulk's original skin tone was gray. While DC did change quite a bit of Doomsday, mostly by making him a villain rather than a hero, there's enough evidence to show that the DC antagonist was at least inspired by Marvel's Green Giant. At number 8, it's Lobo. Bet you didn't know, it's a ripoff of Wolverine. You see, Lobo was DC's answer to Wolverine, but they were not as focused on his abilities. Instead, Lobo was almost identical to Logan in personality, being a gritty mercenary who was rather sick of life. He first appeared in DC Comics as a villain in the 80s, but unfortunately, he did not take well with the readers. And in the 90s, the writers at DC revamped Lobo, making him an anti-hero who parodied of some of Marvel's grittiest characters and stories, with most of the focus being on parodying Wolverine. And Lobo has become somewhat of a fan favorite character now for DC, being one of the darkest characters to date. While he hasn't appeared in any live action movies just yet, rumor has it that Warner Brothers and DC are finally planning on giving the anti-hero his own movie, with Michael Bay being eyed to direct. At number 7, Bane, which is a ripoff of Nuke and Crossbones. Okay, so DC created the Batman villain Bane in the early 90s, following the creation of Nuke and Crossbones by Marvel in the late 80s. While it's unclear which of these two characters Bane was based on most, there is plenty of evidence to claim that Bane is a ripoff of both Marvel villains. His abilities and origin are most similar to Nuke, who was made in a lab using chemicals and drugs like steroids to boost up his strength. Now, Crossbones, on the other hand, has similar abilities to both Nuke and Bane, but his mask design is almost identical to that of Bane. It's safe to say that of the three characters, Bane has been the most successful. Bane has had 2 live-action iterations over the years, whereas Nuke has appeared as a minor villain in both seasons of Jessica Jones and Crossbones, and was also a minor villain in the later 2 Captain America movies. At number 6, Swamp Thing, which, believe it or not, is a ripoff of Man-Thing. Okay, so first off, the actual origins of these characters is as murky and unknown as the swamps that they live in. You see, DC's Swamp Thing and Marvel's Man-Thing were each created and published within a month of each other. While Man-Thing did release first, there is not enough evidence to determine which idea was created originally. You see, while most people assume that Swamp Thing was the ripoff, the numerous heads of DC over the years avidly denied these claims, saying that it was all just a coincidence. Both Swamp Thing and Man-Thing have been very successful since their creation in 1971, so it's safe to say that neither of them has surpassed the other. Both of them have even received their own movies, with Swamp Thing releasing in '82 and Man-Thing in '05. At number 5 on the list, it's Blue Beetle. Come on, it's a ripoff of Spider-Man. Now, the history of the character Blue Beetle is quite complex, as the original incarnation of the character was first made by Fox Comics in '39. Now, however, the character was sold a number of times, eventually being purchased by DC in the early '80s. While the original versions of Blue Beetle were not very similar to Spider-Man, who was first created in '62, the DC version of the character was strikingly similar to Marvel's Web Slinger. Not only are they both bug-like heroes, but the backstory and characteristics of DC's Blue Beetle are very similar to those of Peter Parker. While Blue Beetle never got close to the success of Spider-Man, he still became a very popular character for DC and still is to this day. At number 4, Killer Croc. This is a ripoff of the Lizard. Okay, so the Lizard, that was created as a Spider-Man villain in '63. He was a scientist who turned into a large reptilian monster that posed a threat to Spider-Man on numerous occasions, even appearing as the main villain in 2012's The Amazing Spider-Man. Now in '83, DC followed suit by creating the Batman villain Killer Croc. Like the Lizard, Killer Croc was also a human that became a large reptilian monster, posing a threat for one of the most popular superheroes in their comics. Over the years, Killer Croc has arguably surpassed the Lizard, becoming one of the most famous Batman villains in the comics. Oh, on top of that, the makeup done on Killer Croc in Suicide Squad played a major part in winning an Academy Award for Best Makeup in 2017. This is quite the achievement for a rip-off character. At number 3, Dr. Fate. Come on, it's a ripoff of Doctor Strange. Okay, so whether or not DC's Dr. Fate was actually a ripoff of Doctor Strange is disputable, as Dr. Fate's first appearance was in 1940, 23 years before Doctor Strange's first appearance in '63. Now, the catch is that Dr. Fate was never more than a background character for DC before Doctor Strange was created. But once Doctor Strange became a major hit for Marvel, DC started giving stories to Dr. Fate, hoping that Marvel's readers would read about Dr. Fate as well, and they were right. Dr. Fate actually became quite the hit for DC. While he isn't as well known today as he was during his height in the '60s and '70s, Dr. Fate used to be a well-known name in the comic book world, at times being more successful than Doctor Strange himself. Had Marvel not created their Sorcerer Supreme, it's likely that Dr. Fate wouldn't have made any appearances after the '60s. At number 2, Damage. This is a ripoff of the Hulk. Okay, so there weren't too many blatant similarities between Damage and the Hulk until DC introduced a new version of the former in 2018. As part of the company's new Age of Heroes initiative, DC gave Damage a new series with soldier Ethan Avery carrying the mantle. Avery's version of the character looks nearly identical to the Hulk, and Damage's stories usually revolve around the idea of a raging monster wreaking havoc on innocents. Sound a little familiar? Yeah, I thought so. Sure, there are some clear differences, like Bruce Banner is a scientist that became the victim of a freak accident, while Avery is a soldier that was exposed to a government program. But it's clear that Damage is DC's latest attempt at making their own Hulk. And at number 1, Red Lion. Okay, so this is a ripoff of Black Panther. Okay, so Black Panther is one of Marvel's most beloved characters, even more so after their smash hit film. As the benevolent king of Wakanda, a technological genius, and a skilled unarmed fighter, T'Challa is a perfect leader. First appearing in '66, he's also the first hero of African descent in Marvel. The utopian vision in Jack Kirby's take on Wakanda came to life in film in 2018. In 2016, DC introduced its villain, Red Lion, and the parallel is blatant. From name to look, the two seem like perfect reflections, but where Black Panther is tinged with optimism, Red Lion looks like his cynical counterpart. He's the dictator for life on war-torn Burdunia, another fictional African country. Their similarity is no accident, as Lion's creator, Christopher Priest, has worked as a writer on many Black Panther comics. There you have it. Here are just some of the characters DC ripped off from Marvel Comics. Who did we miss? Let us know in the comments below, and if you haven't already liked our page, go smash that like button. And if you like what you saw, you can always check out more awesome content on our page. I'm Andrew Caravella. You can follow me on social media, handle OnAirAndrew. And as always, thanks for watching.